Hi and welcome back to White Noise. We hope you've enjoyed our 7 days of horror so far. Today we're going to be talking about something that no white noise or Halloween is complete about, and that is queer horror. Of course, we've spoken about queer horror quite a few times on the podcast, but today's more about honestly horror that probably contributed to us being queer. So they're slightly different from me and Leanna because I got into horror a little bit later than she did, or at least as intensely as I'm into it now. So yeah, I've got a list, Leanna's got a list. They did cross over. And for me as well, I have like a few honorable mentions that I didn't grow up watching, but ones that I know for a fact probably would have made me realize a lot sooner if I just had. So I don't know if you want to go through your list first.
Yeah, so mine is interesting because I didn't necessarily grow up on queer horror. I found some stuff later on. But if I'm gonna say the ones that I kind of shaped me, they would probably be like Hellraiser, Scream, Fright Night,
Mm-hmm.
and Nightmare on Elm Street 2. And then I've got a
See,
few
those are
other
my honorable mentions.
yeah, and then my
Yeah.
honorable mentions are kind of either newer or newer to me, and those are Raw, Fear Street trilogy, Psycho slash Rope. I've just both, Hitchcock, um, Bride of Frankenstein, Thelma, the films of James Whale. So that would be like the old Frankenstein, Invisible Man, and Bride of Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm. The one I'm actually curious about to hear about first is Thelma, because it's kind of ringing a bell, but
Yes,
I'm
it is.
not, I can't, nothing's coming to mind.
I think it's Swedish if I remember correctly. No, it's Norwegian. I think it's by Joachim Trier, who did The Worst Person in the World. And people are always like, what the fuck? He did like a horror film? They're like mind blown. And it's so interesting because it's very reminiscent of Cat People. I don't know if you've ever heard of Cat People.
Again, ringing a bell, but
So
no.
it's like this like very clearly lesbian horror film which
Mm-hmm.
uses metaphors, to indicate lesbianism, and it was made during the Hays Code era. So essentially it's about when this woman, whenever she feels desire, she turns into a cat and maulds people. And it's so
Okay.
clear that it's a metaphor for her being a lesbian.
Yeah.
And Thelma really kind of like riffs on that, but it's less like horrific and it's more like an awakening. So it's kind of similar to Raw in quite a few ways. It's like discovering something about yourself, very similar to Ginger Snaps as well. It's just about a girl who comes from like a kind of like religious, not religious, but like strict family. And she starts like discovering new things about herself. She, like, has all these new experiences, like trying drugs and all. And she just kind of like embarrasses herself. She's like a bit socially inept, and she doesn't quite at first understand that this obsession with this girl is like her liking her, and
Mm-hmm.
she the whole point is that she kind of has like these telekinetic powers, so very similar to Carrie as well. It kind of like takes inspiration from a lot of stuff, but it's very much its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think you would really like it.
It's just interesting you also mentioning like Raw and Ginger Snaps when you're talking about it, because it's just made me realize how like a lot of queer horror is also rooted in body horror.
Yes, so a lot of people often talk about this in like reference to say like transness and transitioning. So like the
Mm-hmm.
werewolf is a very strong metaphor for being trans,
Yeah.
or gay. And it's really interesting when you think about like Ginger Snaps, it seems so gay and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
but it isn't, but why does it feel
I
gay?
mean, we said in our Ginger Snaps episode as well that like the fact that lycanthropy has been traditionally
Yes.
assigned to men makes
Mhm.
no sense to us whatsoever. It is Ginger Snaps. Like, if you don't agree with us, then you've probably never seen Ginger Snaps.
Mhm.
Like, it just makes so much sense that lycanthropy would be a metaphor for
Yeah.
women transitioning through puberty, and then also, yeah, just queerness in general.
Yeah, and then trans individuals transitioning as well, and it all comes together and makes sense. So when we say like queerness, we're also talking about like more of like the LGBTQIA plus community.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily just about being like, your sexual orientation. Like this
Mm-hmm.
is mostly what me and Sky are going to talk about because we're both cis women. But
Mm-hmm.
like some of the films we're going to talk about are also going to touch on that slightly, but we're not going to delve too deep because we are not the people to be
Yeah.
delving into that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll
Mm-hmm.
put recommendations probably on Twitter and all for people you should watch talk about those things.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been watching I don't know if you've seen it, that Queer for Fear documentary on Shudder.
No, I haven't. Do you know what? So last Halloween I got a Shudder subscription because of all the episodes that we were doing then.
Yeah.
But it was like obviously the free one, and
Hmm.
then I didn't because there are so many streaming services now.
Yeah,
Fuck
yeah.
me. but like, so I didn't keep it, but like I keep getting adverts for it, and I think I'm gonna get another Shudder
Its
subscription.
catalog is getting so good now
It's
as well.
getting really good.
The original content is so good because like they actually, a lot of the people involved in it and that have money in Shudder are like filmmakers themselves, horror filmmakers who have a lot of connections to queer horror filmmakers and like horror filmmakers of color and stuff. And so it's like you get all these interesting perspectives in their documentaries. They're
Just
so
quickly, while
good.
we're on the topic, if Shudder at any point wants to like be our first sponsor, that would be fantastic.
That
We would
is
sing your
honestly,
praises.
I am manifesting. You don't understand. I am going to be plugging Shudder so much
Yeah.
when we're putting out these episodes. But honestly, like, if it wasn't for Shudder, I wouldn't like know about a lot of this stuff I'm going to talk about today because I've been watching that Queer Fear documentary and because of stuff like history of horror that they've done. So, like, if you're going to take anything from this episode, just know one, me and Sky are both massive fans of gay horror. Two, you need Shudder. You need it in your life.
I get like all of my like Shudder content diluted through you, or I get it through like video essays on YouTube and things like that, because as we're just proving, Halloween, you know, the the queers awaken, we come to life, and you know, we've done our Gays and Ghouls episode and things like that, and we're not the only ones. You know, there have been many YouTubers, influencers, podcasts that have covered it, because it's just true. Like, it's nothing new that horror and queer are so closely related, but this is why I think we wanted to get like a little personal today and just talk about the ones that really hit us. So like for me, it was so my on my list, it's like so Death Becomes Her was a big one. It's one that I watched when I was younger and didn't actually think about being so influentially, apparently I can't speak, about being queer. Until I really, like, I was sitting thinking like, okay, so what films did I watch? Because I honestly thought at one point I didn't really have any, because I didn't watch, apart from the films that you let me, I didn't really watch any films that I would have considered queer, either explicitly or undertones, but Death Becomes Her was one of them. And then obviously we've also got Jennifer's Body, which we've spoken about quite a lot. I watched that not when it came out, but I was still quite young. I'm kind of counting any films I watched pre-coming out, really.
Very interesting.
Well, so there's also then Rocky Horror, The Lost Boys, and Interview with the Vampire.
This is the Sky calling.
This is, again, I think I said it like on another episode, but it is a summoning circle. And these are really the 5 points. Like, if you want to summon me, you just need Interview with the Vampire, The Lost Boys, Jennifer's Body, Rocky Horror, and no. I might, if I don't have anything else to do that night, I might appear for Glee, but it would probably be more along the lines of The Night Before Christmas or Death Becomes Her, you know what I mean? Or even Moulin Rouge, but I'm getting off topic here because none of them are horror films.
But anyhow, yes, very Sky. This is like Sky lore 101, isn't it? I think that that's really interesting that you name ones that are before you came out, because you would have been drawn to them before truly like realizing your own queerness.
I think this is
for
why,
a certain reason or another, you know.
Exactly. I think this is why, though, because I could go on like similar to you, like the ones that you've named kind of fill in the gaps of probably what my honorable mentions would be, like especially ones like Hellraiser, for example. But I only watched that last year, so I feel like I now watch everything with a queer lens, like literally everything. But pre coming out, I didn't. So to me, I feel like if it really stood out to me as a queer film, then it had an influence on me. You know what I mean?
No, I completely get that. Yeah. Do you want to talk about any in particular in depth?
Well, originally I really wanted to talk about Interview with the Vampire, because obviously the new series has just premiered, but it's like I'm in purgatory right now, or I'm like actually just in one of the 7 circles of hell, because I don't have a way to watch it in the UK without buying another subscription. And I can't, like, maybe when it's all out and I can either get away with just having to pay for a month subscription or get a free trial and I can watch it all at once. But it is painful for me, because when it first got announced that they were remaking Interview with the Vampire, I, like most people, were like, why? It's like when they like were in talks about possibly remaking The Lost Boys at some point, I'm like, things existed, The Lost Boys more so, but like things existed at a certain time for a certain reason. There is like a campness to them that
Mm.
if you do now, you can't get away with it. So what did Interview with the Vampire do? They just went full blown gay, and I haven't even seen it yet. I'm so happy. At some point, I will watch it. Um, but I would have loved to talk about that a bit more. So if I had watched it, obviously I haven't. But one thing I do want to say is to Miss Anne Rice, I need to apologize
Why?
because oh my god, not even last year. It's how long we've had this podcast now. During our first Halloween special during Gays and Ghouls, we talked about Into the Vampire briefly and Anne Rice's relationship fan fiction, and then in our fan fiction episode we got into a bit more depth about it, about how she was so against the fan fiction and things like that. And I will admit, I didn't do like super in-depth research because I really thought this was just something that like everybody knew.
Yeah.
I wasn't telling anything people didn't already know, but I actually recently watched somebody talk about it, and I realized I had it so wrong. I was kind of talking about how I was saying, oh, I hope she isn't, oh, sorry, it wasn't like against just like the LGBT community and things like that, and that isn't why she was so against the fan fiction. And that's completely true. Like, she was such an advocate for the LGBT community, and I didn't even know that. And I made it sound like that she wasn't. But I like obviously I tried to excuse it. I was like, oh no, it was during the time and it was a work that meant a lot to her. But like, if anything, she was the one advocating for this series to be more gay and more queer.
Yeah.
So the series that they're making now, from what I can tell from not yet having watched it, it is what she envisioned and she would love it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just need to take this minute to apologize because she created one of my favorite things of all time, and I just basically like did not respect the artist the way I should have done.
Don't you worry. I think your love for it and the way you've spoken about it over the years more than makes up for it.
I hope so. I think about that just spoke in the last 30 seconds, people might realize. But
do you want to talk at all more about Interview with a Vampire? Because I have a film/novel that is going to link very well to stuff in Interview with the Vampire.
I don't think I have anything to say that I haven't already. So, but now I'm really intrigued about what you're on about.
Right. So you know what a lot of people say it's one of the clearest indications of like queerness in Interview with the Vampire. People often mention the family dynamic, two men with a child. Do you ever think about Frankenstein, particularly Bride of Frankenstein, if you've ever seen it? It's two men making a creation together.
Yeah.
Like without a female presence. So if we really want to go into like some true queer horror, we're going to talk about James Whale, icon, gay director, gay filmmaker, who was making such obviously queer horror at a time when you couldn't obviously say it. So like Frankenstein itself has so many little queer aspects to it. Number one, Mary Shelley. People had their suspicions about Mary Shelley since she was born.
Yeah.
She was, if she was alive today, let's just say there would probably be, it wouldn't be so subtle. Yeah.
Yes.
There was always these rumors. I didn't actually know this until quite recently. There were always rumors that her and her husband would engage in all these like parties, and that like maybe they were like each other's beards. Obviously, we can never know for fact, but there is like more and more suspicion as the years go by, and like more like private letters and diaries and all. I found.
I have heard about that.
Interesting.
Honestly, I feel the same way about like gothic literature as I do about like 80s horror. There is camp and queerness just laced within them.
Completely. And then that's why I think it's so interesting then that a gay director could recognize these things at a time when the general public probably didn't notice it so much. And then he went on to adapt Frankenstein. And that is like the version of Frankenstein everyone thinks of. Like it's alive. Da, 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 da.
Yeah.
He also did The Invisible Man, which has like a lot of like queer moments in it. And Bride of Frankenstein, Jesus Christ. Like, I don't know if you've ever actually seen that really famous moment when the bride is first like, awoken, and she takes one look at the creature and she just immediately rejects him. She just screams and she's like, oh no. Like a lot of people have seen that as like either, I don't know, just as a very feminist thing. Like just because she was created for him doesn't mean she's interested in him. And it's and especially in Bride of Frankenstein, you also have, I forget his name, what's his name, the helper, Frankenstein's helper, and he's so
Eagle.
he's played so camply
Yeah.
by the actor, and the actor was a queer man. And it's like,
Hmm.
James Bond knew what he was doing.
There are
I was like,
people.
we have to make this together, Doctor. We have to do this. And it's just, and he like kind of like low-key resents the bride and all these things. And it's just like,
Hmm.
it's so delicious. Like, I
When
love
we
it.
first like started this podcast, like in like the earlier episodes, we, at least I was like a bit reserved in kind of like reading into things like this because, you know, we both grew up in like this, you know, we went to the same school, grew up in like similar areas of like whenever you got like really passionate and interested in stuff like that, people would think you were weird. So then when it was coupled with reading queer subtext into stuff, it was even worse. Like
People
people
felt
just
like you
wouldn't
were
let you live.
projecting and just putting it onto it rather than
Exactly.
reading from what is
So
literally not even
like
subtext, just text.
exactly. So seeing all of these kind of like classic novels and just stories that like, you know, we were, a lot of them I happily consumed, but were forced to consume in school,
Mm.
be realized through a queer lens is
Yes.
very validating. It's so
Very validating,
validating.
especially when you do something like watch these queer documentaries and like critics and all start to talk about it openly and like not
Mm-hmm.
confirm your suspicions because it isn't a stated fact if it's not canon in the text, but it's like you say, it's validating. Like it feels
Mm-hmm.
so good that you're like, I knew it wasn't just me, I knew it. And it
And
just
I'm also,
it,
I'm obsessed. Like I'm honestly obsessed with just like consuming everything to do with like especially queer horror at the moment because so much,
me
I
too.
think this is another reason why I love Halloween so much. Like I think I literally saw a tweet or TikTok or something the other day of being like, making Halloween your whole personality isn't it? And I'm just like, oh my,
That was definitely by a straight person.
oh,
Come
100%. But
on.
this is what I mean though. It's like I love Halloween for a lot of reasons. Like not to get too deep into it. Like it is a big thing in my family for many reasons. But as I've gotten older and like started to kind of understand myself a bit more, and especially after I came out and
Mm,
I was like, it was almost like coming out kind of gave me permission to start watching stuff with a gay lens. Like,
yeah.
even I still might have got weird looks or comments from people, it was like now that I was doing it, it felt to me like I wasn't reading into it. I was gaining from it what I needed.
Yeah.
And then as I got older, I even realized that, like, oh, I'm not actually reading into anything. Like, it was
No.
always
Quite
there.
often it's intentionally put there, especially if we're talking about like, like pre-code or post-code or, just anything that's like closely around like Hays Code era film. Like
Mm-hmm.
that stuff was put there in that subtle way by filmmakers who wanted queer audiences to know without, being like persecuted. It's a if you know, kind of vibe in a lot of these
Mm-hmm.
films. And that's why so many people can understand why you're reading into it, because obviously they don't have that same lens. Like
Mm-hmm.
people who are more tuned in can of course notice these things, but if you've never really experienced queerness yourself, how would you really notice some of the very subtle stuff in these films?
Exactly. Like,
Hmm.
because it's even like we just said, you know, we can't really talk about on like trans horror and things like that because it's not things that we've experienced
Yeah.
ourselves. Like, yes, being a part of the LGBT community 100% does give you more, I would say, an open mind towards things and to recognize certain aspects of stuff a lot more.
Yeah.
But, you know, like you just said, we can't really comment on it ourselves. And I
Mhm.
think that's what a lot of, you know, heterosexual people kind of either refuse to accept or just see when it comes to certain horrors. Like they will think you're reading into it.
Mhm.
But I think we've come to a point in time where, like, no matter what your sexuality is, I feel like everybody knows that queer people have like claimed horror and Halloween.
Well, it's just as simple as being the outsider, being the outcast. Like,
Mm-hmm.
of course, people who in day-to-day life are treated like they're invisible or an outcast are going to be drawn to invisible individuals and outcasts in films. And
Mm-hmm.
where do you see that more than in any other genre?
Mm-hmm.
Horror. And quite
Mm-hmm.
often people identify the villain. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's always been a known thing, that people say, like Freddy Krueger, a massively loved character in
Mm-hmm.
like the queer community. Nancy from Nightmare on Elm Street, the actress, she constantly talks about how she's had so many people who are queer come up to her throughout her career and say like, Nightmare on Elm Street means so much to me. Like my homophobic community was my Freddy, and like,
Mm-hmm.
all these things. It's just so interesting that
Mm-hmm.
like even without realizing it, queer people are drawn to it. and that's how you know the link is so strong, because like I didn't grow up in a strong queer community. We both didn't, because we're from a more conservative area, but we were both drawn to horror. But we didn't know that. Like, we didn't grow up in a queer community and someone goes, "Oh, watch this." Individually, we're into those things and then realize
Yeah.
I
And
think
it's,
that's so interesting.
yeah, it's so strange as well because like there are a lot of moments where I look back at my life and I'm like, how did I not realize it? And I know everybody has those, but even looking back now on like these films, it's like I'm looking back on them with like two kind of minds. Like I remember how I felt about them when I watched them, and obviously as I was watching them, I didn't realize the queerness of them. But then watching, like thinking about them the way I've watched them now, I do. I don't even know if that makes sense.
No, I completely do.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as black and white, like, oh, I saw it through a queer lens, or I didn't, or I started seeing it through a queer lens at this age, and da 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 da. It's not as simple as that at all, you know? And they're all different texts, you know? It's not like one day you suddenly start seeing all these films through a queer lens. It's like maybe one film you noticed it more than others, and you know, it's more grey, isn't it?
I think it's also interesting because that you have ones like Jennifer's Body, for example,
Yeah.
that a lot of people are like, oh, that's no surprise that it was one of, the ones that I wouldn't obviously even say made me realize I was gay necessarily, because it wasn't like it all happened at the same time, but would have been a part of it just being in the back of my mind all the
Yeah.
time.
Like, you
But
watch Jennifer's Body and you're like, do I enjoy this more than other people do?
exactly. But we even spoke about it before. Like people always think like, oh yeah, especially as a woman,
Mm,
people, they think of that scene between Amanda Seyfried and how am I forgetting people's, oh my
Megan
god.
Fox.
Yeah, oh my god. Just forget
Wow.
both of their names. Anyway, everyone knows who I mean. Jennifer and Needy. That's the first time I think I've ever remembered like a character's name over an actress's name. Anyway, but that's the scene everybody thinks of. But it is not. And do you know what's weird? It's not the scene that I think of. And I feel like that's how, more than anything, I knew that I was queer. Because whilst obviously seeing queer representation, because that's what it was, even if it wasn't, obviously it was toxic and it was performative.
Even if it's a bit like, it's still representation in some form.
Yeah, so that can obviously be a part of like how you realize who you are and things like that. But again, when I think back on it, it's not those scenes or those moments. For some like films, I don't even think I can really pinpoint it to an exact moment. Like it's just kind of like an overall feeling. Some films I can, like to bring up Interview with the Vampire again, there are really iconic moments in it when like, Lestat first feeds on Louis and it's like that's queer as hell. And then when they're both feeding from the same woman, that's queer as hell. But Jennifer's Body and Death Becomes Her, there is just a campness and queerness
Yes.
overlaid through the entire film. I couldn't tell you exactly
Not
what scene
necessarily
made
like
me,
moments, really, is it? It's just the general
yeah,
air. I will
even
say,
something, yeah,
like,
even something like Jennifer's Body that has a, a really obvious queer scene in it. It's just not what I think of.
well, I don't tend to go, if we are going to say scenes, I know we said we weren't going to talk about like specific moments, but in Jennifer's Body, the one I do tend to think of when I think like, bit of a realization moment is right towards the end when she floats, and it isn't the I go both ways thing, because I feel like that's a bit obvious. For me,
Yeah.
it's more in that conversation prior to that moment when Needy's like, why did you need Chip? Why did it have to be him? And it's like, oh, if you know, you know.
Oh, that's
Do you know
so
what I mean?
true.
To me, that always screamed gay.
I thought you were gonna say the hallway scene, but that
No,
makes
even that
so
one as
much
well. Oh, do you
sense.
mean when she's like, wear something cute?
Yeah,
No.
that's what I thought. Or even, oh, do you know the bit that gets me? And I think again we spoke about this before because it's just so queer girl being in love with her best friend because it's like her closest female relationship. It's when they're at the gig and Needy's just looking at her.
And she's like,
It
so
hurts. It
it's
honestly, it actually,
horrible.
even now, it still hurts.
It's so sad. And like also in the conversation I'm thinking of as well is when like she's condescending, like she's being patronizing to Needy, and it's so because Needy is onto her. Do you know what I mean? Like Needy's like, I know what you are, and so Jennifer like retaliates with like bitchiness when she's like, oh, grow up, Needy, and like all this, and it's like she's onto her, and she just is bitchy back. I love it.
You froze again. I don't know what you just said. I'm
Oh
sorry.
no.
I'm
Where did you hear
sorry.
that to?
I think literally after I just talked about the bar scene.
Oh, fuck. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No, no, it's fine, it's fine. So, like, in the conversation I was talking about as well, there's the bit where Needy kind of like she's just like talking to Jennifer and saying all this stuff and kind of indicating that she's onto her and is like, I know what you are. And Jennifer's like, grow
Hmm.
up, Needy. It's like when she feels like someone is aware of it and clocking her, she like
Hmm.
retaliates. And I find that really
Yeah.
interesting. You know, just that
Hmm.
whole conversation.
Hmm.
People always go away from that thinking of that I go both ways. But to me, that is not the most interesting part of that conversation at all. It's all of the
I
like unsaid
totally
stuff.
agree.
Hmm.
I mean, obviously there are parts of that film that are really exploitative. Like we
Yeah.
in our Jennifer's Body episode literally talked about how the marketing was totally wrong. But this is how you can 100% say it's a queer film. And like, I'm not saying it's good for queer representation, but it's good for the little queers like us
Mm,
who we're not out yet. And like you said, we grew up in like quite conservative areas. So there
mm,
weren't a lot of people we could have spoke to about this. Um, outside of like, possibly family or whatever, or like, we didn't even speak to each other about this
no.
because it's just not, I don't know, it wasn't
Just
even
wasn't really
like,
something you spoke to your friends about.
it's not like I feel like I ever felt ashamed about it. It's because I feel like I couldn't explain it.
Yeah.
Like, unless I said, oh, it's because I saw two girls kissing, but that wasn't it. That really wasn't it. And I was like, I don't have the words to explain this. Like, I can't explain why, yeah, like either a bar scene has made me feel a certain way, or even
Mm,
like the conversations between Needy and Jennifer, the
yeah.
really average everyday conversations of
Hmm.
them teasing each other. I'm like, why do I feel weird about this?
I think what's always really funny to me is like when I look back and I like realize like watching a lot of horror films, I was always so into the female characters. Like I never really paid any
Mhm.
attention to the male characters. It was always like the pretty girls in horror films. Like
Mhm.
as I got older, I was like, huh. In
You've
Nightmare on
even
Elm
said,
Street, I liked Nancy more than the others.
yeah, you've even said before, like when we've talked about the Lost Boys, for example, like I said how obviously she is beautiful, but I've always found Star a really redundant character because I don't know why I do, but obviously I feed a lot more into the queerness between
Mm,
Michael and David
mm.
because it's there.
It's
Um,
definitely a last minute studio decision. Where they're like, it's so
oh
pretty.
yeah,
Right,
definitely.
well,
Honestly, it was almost like they'd filmed this whole thing and they were like so intense in the scene, and they were like, "Shit, okay, we need a girl to balance this
honestly,
out because this is getting way too cool."
that sex scene feels like reshoot material.
Oh my God, doesn't it? Like
Mm,
it feels so unnecessary. I think when I was showing my partner it, literally like a few months ago or the other
mm.
month, whenever it was, when we were watching it, I even said to her, I was like, does this feel weird to you? Does it feel weird that now they're having sex? It's like gratuitous. Like, why is
Yeah,
this in
because
here?
in most vampire films, that would be really sexy. But in that
Hmm.
film, it just feels wrong. And it's because they've set him up as queer.
Yep. The fact that David and Michael had more tension hanging from a bridge than Star and Michael did whilst they was having sex just
Yeah.
really says it all.
The only bit where there was real tension between Michael and Star is in that really voyeuristic scene, when he first spots her at the like
Mm.
gig on the boardwalk, and that's because they're
Hmm.
not actually in the scene and on camera together. Because like as soon as they're like in the
Yeah.
same space, there's not really any tension
And
at all.
also, to be fair, I'm sorry, but if you saw her in a crowd, whether you're gay, straight, it doesn't matter. She
Oh,
would be
she
the
would
first thing that
stand
you pay.
a
Exactly. So
100%.
I don't even see that as like desire or attraction. I just see that as like, I don't know, he admired her hair or something like that.
Pretty hair.
Yeah.
That's literally what's really funny is that's literally when I was like a kid watching The Lost Boys. I was like, she just has such nice hair. You
Mhm.
know, like, and I was like, oh, I want to be her. And then I got older, I was like,
That's it.
oh,
Oh my God, that is so it though. Like, we've definitely said this before on the podcast, but there was such confusion between. I think this is also like what a lot of how a lot of people kind of like lie to themselves, I suppose, because it's
yes.
like, oh, I don't want them. It's just I have this admiration for them.
Yeah, and it's you just think like it's just appreciation of the female form. And you
Hmm.
like tell
People
yourself,
even
oh, we
still do it
shouldn't.
today.
Yeah.
Like they're kind of like, oh, like you can like really like it's even when you see like fucking, I don't know, influencer bros like hyping each other up and they're
Mm,
like, oh yeah, just like really they just really get each other. And I'm just like,
mm,
you really trying to tell me you can I think I've also said this before.
mm.
Like in narratives when men are obsessed with men, how the fuck you can tell me that's not queer? It's the
Yeah.
same thing in like today's influencer culture. Like, I'm sorry, but there are
Yeah.
queer undertones if you're that obsessed. Like,
It's
I
just so
love,
funny to me.
yeah, but I have female friends, and you are one of them that I adore with all my heart. But I suppose after I came out, can tell the difference between like my female friends who like I really really connect with, and then my partner who like I'm
Yeah,
totally in love with. You know what I mean?
exactly. Completely agree. I
Yeah.
like my boyfriend will not care about me telling like the listeners this. He'll find it funny. But basically, what's really funny to me about my boyfriend is he is so like aware of like he's because he grew up in where I live right now, Brighton, because it's
Mhm.
the queer capital of the UK, so there's
Yeah.
more understanding and openness. And like he was talking to me about this time he saw a band and he was like, I was just staring at Singer. I was like, that is the most beautiful man I've ever seen in my life. And he just like talks about men in this way. And I find it so funny because like I feel like a lot of queer women are very used to like talking about an appreciation of the female form. You don't hear a lot of guys openly admit that that's what it is instead of going, oh, you're
Yeah.
just a beautiful guy,
Do
like
you
to
know
just
what's funny
straight
though?
up say like,
Is
no,
that
gorgeous,
yeah.
beautiful.
I
So
have so many female friends who are questioning or bisexual or pansexual or
yeah.
just open,
Mm,
who are with male partners,
yeah.
and all of their male partners give off queer vibes.
Yes. And
All of them.
do you know what some of the best straight couples are between two people that are very open to their queerness or potential queerness or like
Totally.
curiosity. I think it just gives you like a bit of a broader understanding of like sexuality in
I
general.
don't even think you have to actually be queer. It's just
No.
like you said, it's having, there are so many, and yeah, I am calling out straight people today. It's Halloween, it's my given right. There are so many straight people who are just so painfully straight that they won't even entertain the idea
Yeah.
of just admiring somebody. You don't even have to admire someone's physique, because not all romantic attraction is
Mm,
obviously physical. You can like really be obsessed with, like, you know what, your favorite influencer that you're obsessed with, if
mm.
they're all you talk about and they're the same sex as you,
I've got
that
something to
ain't
tell you.
that's a little queer. I'm sorry, I'm not saying that you're
And
gay,
do you
but
know what? That is something I really do love about horror films. It's like everyone's always got like they're a bit naked, and
yeah.
like even if they're not actually naked, maybe there's a top off or like Nightmare on Elm Street classic crop top moment. Like there's like all these like there's a sensuality to horror films that
Mhm.
like you really get to explore it through that, and I feel like that's why like like say like queer people in the people that are within the queer community and the horror community, which if it was a Venn diagram is almost a circle,
Yeah.
like like those people, they just have such, I feel like, a more transparent appreciation for like the human body, and I think that
Mhm.
kind of goes into like body horror a little bit as well, you know.
Totally.
Mm.
Yeah.
So talking about body horror, queer horror and all, there is a very obvious elephant in the room, a film we both very much enjoy and we've briefly
Mhm.
mentioned already, which is, of course, Hellraiser.
Mhm.
What a film. What a
Yeah,
film. What a
which I
moment.
only watched last year.
Who cares? Because at least you've seen it.
True.
Mm. I feel like it is underappreciated within our
Oh,
age group. They
hugely.
see like
Hugely.
Pinhead and they know it as an icon, but they don't seem to like realize like what Hellraiser actually is. Do you know what I
Mhm.
mean? There's not as much of
Yeah.
an understanding about what Hellraiser is as there is like Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween and all, because it is
Mhm.
harder to explain. It's not this simple premise like, oh, someone goes around killing people. It's much more about like
It's really not.
eroticism and
And
stuff.
it's also not as fun. You know
No.
what I mean? Like
Oh
an, even
God, no.
though,
It's
maybe, you know what I mean?
uncomfortable.
Exactly. Even like a Nightmare on Elm Street that has like a pretty fucked up premise that like they even feed into the further the films go along.
Mm.
Obviously, Freddy's like a funny character. Um, Even like Halloween to an extent. Like I guess it's because these characters have been memed, but I
Yes.
don't really think Pinhead's been memed.
Only by
Not in
die
the same
fans,
way.
I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's never been in the same way, like not
Mhm.
like in a silly way.
Yes, no, I completely
Yeah.
agree. I think like the people that have seen Hellraiser immediately can tell that there's a vibe to it, even if
Mm-hmm.
they don't necessarily think of it straight away as like queer. They definitely notice there's more of like a like subculture element to
Mm-hmm.
Hellraiser, which is obviously because it was written by Clive Barker and directed by Clive Barker, the original film, who himself was like a big presence in queer spaces and like BDSM community. Don't know if you
Mm-hmm.
know about that, but that
I
makes so
didn't, but it makes
much
a lot of
sense.
sense. Yeah.
Exactly. So like the whole aspect of like pain and pleasure and like it's
Mm-hmm.
so good because it comes from personal experience.
Yeah.
It's not someone trying to like write about something they're not part
Do
of.
you know what? And this is like a comparison that I bet nobody expected. It's like when 50 Shades of Grey came out and everybody was, obsessed with it. And I still remember to this day reading it as like
I was
a
like a
16-year
virgin
old.
and I was like, this is shit.
Exactly. I was reading it and I was
Actually,
like,
we've
this is the
spoken
most
about this
vanilla
before.
shit.
We've spoken about this in a previous episode, probably like a fanfic one. We literally said we had read dirtier shit in fanfic.
This is what I mean, right? So, and you are so, so right about, I think even in the fan fiction episode, we talked about if you're going to write about something, you need to have either a really clear understanding or some kind of experience with it,
Mm,
especially if you're going to like allow that thing to be put out into the public. Because
mm,
50 Shades of Grey, just to go off on a slight bit of a tangent here,
yeah.
was so damaging to the BDSM community because people who had no idea or no experience with it got the complete wrong idea about it, and
Yes.
it fed into entirely really toxic misunderstandings about it. Like
Mm,
one of the biggest and most important things about the BDS community is consent
yeah.
and comfort. So
Hmm.
like you might be surprised to know if you don't really know a lot about it, but it just is.
Yeah.
And this is why like something like Hellraiser, that is, the film itself is horrific. Like it genuinely
Mm.
scares. I love it, but it genuinely scares me. Had such a clear understanding of what the BDSM community
Well,
was.
even simple things like the character that, uses the little like puzzle box, he wants it. Like
Mm-hmm.
he is the one that uses that puzzle box and he's done his research. He knows what it is. He
Mm-hmm.
it's not forced upon him, is it? He
Mm-hmm.
chooses that. And I think like that wouldn't come from someone that didn't have experience in BDSM. Because like you say, a massive part of that community is safety and comfort
Mm-hmm.
and
I think
consent.
it's really embodied in like that classic line, which I'm now going to butcher because bearing in mind I have only seen this film once, but it's something to do with like when somebody asks the Cenobites like what they are, and I
Oh, it
think
says like
Pinhead answers
demons
like
to
to
some,
some
angels to
god.
others. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that is like, I don't know what the tagline for the film was, but that should have been it
I
if it
think that
wasn't
might be
already.
it on
It
some
might, it
posters.
should have been, because
Yeah.
it's so, it encapsulates the film entirely. And like you said, I really think it feeds into that understanding of the BDSM community, that
Yes.
like that pleasure and pain. It's not just pain. It's
Yeah.
not. It's
Hmm.
pleasure and pain. Whereas like something like 50 Shades of Grey was just about punishment.
Yeah.
That's not how it works.
And it's just so interesting as well because like, 50 Shades of Grey was loved by straight people. Like it is such a
Oh,
painfully
so
heterosexual story and fan
true.
base. And
Yeah.
it alienated so many queer people. And then I
Mm-hmm.
guess that's part of why like you and me were like, what? Like
Yeah.
even in say like straight relationships, right? And watching straight media, people that are queer still like experience it through their queerness. Do you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? So even
Mm-hmm.
something like 50 Shades of Grey is like, no, it's
No,
an
yeah.
instant no. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we got into this in our fan fiction episode. I'm surprised we didn't,
Mm,
but yeah, just the absolute horrid portrayal of not even just the BDSM community,
mm.
but I'm definitely getting off on a tangent here, but just like kind of any non-heteronormative
Any
relationships,
kind of subculture
yeah,
or
you know what I mean?
subversive
Like
thing. Yeah.
obviously the characters were like male and female, but they were trying to infiltrate into, I don't even know. I don't even fucking know with that series. We're not
Yeah.
here to talk about it, but you know what I
If
mean.
we want to talk a bit more about BDSM community and maybe like
Mm-hmm.
queer community, obviously in both, a very big thing is the concept of a dominant and a submissive, right?
Mm-hmm.
What film perfectly shows that without showing it? Rope by Alfred Hitchcock. Have you ever watched it?
I have never seen it in full, but I've seen so many video essays about
Every
it. The only reason I haven't
time,
watched it is because
dudes,
I can't find it
yeah,
anywhere.
maybe I should have
Yeah.
made note of the characters' names, but every
Hmm.
time the more dominant dude is like berating the like sub one, it's like he's petrified, but she's kind of into it. And it's the entire film, it's like he's edging. I'm not even
Hmm.
joking. It's like something you like, you go, yeah, yeah, okay. Like maybe people like really reading into it, and that's coming from me. And then you watch it, and you're like, bloody hell. And do you know something really interesting about it? That film, the screenwriter was with the actor who plays like the submissive role. Mind blown.
I didn't know
Hitchcock
that.
knew that. He knew it. But he definitely knew a lot about the queer community. Like, and you
Hmm.
understand and appreciate that a lot more because I mean, like, I'm going to go back to Rope, to just briefly mention Psycho, which I will dive into a bit in a minute. Um, he knew Anthony Perkins was a closeted actor. He
Hmm.
knew, and he cast him, and it was perfect. And it's like you can think what you want of that, but Anthony Perkins accepted the role, and it killed
Hmm.
his career. Did you know that? It
Yeah, no,
killed
I
his
did.
career.
Yeah.
It's mind blown, absolutely fascinating. But anyway, so in Rope, so queer. Like they talk
Hmm.
about the act, you never see it, but when they talk about it, they might as well be talking about having sex.
Do you know what's so funny? Like we won't reveal it because episode will be coming, next year, but we were just talking about how, and we've spoken before about how, like, especially queer subtext is just our shit, like so much more than explicit, like scenes or anything like that. But yeah, there is just something about, oh, I don't know, it's just like a hand touch or a lingering
We just love
glance.
subtext. It's more
Yeah,
erotic. Do you know what I
it's
mean? Like the
yes.
relationship in Rope, don't get me wrong, it has its issues, but it really
Hmm.
depends on like what you think of as an issue, right? So like a lot of people immediately will see a dominant and submissive kind of like dynamic in a relationship and be like, that's fucked up. It's like, not really. Depends on
Hmm.
the boundaries and if that works for people, like it really works for a lot of couples, it just
Hmm.
does. And whether or
There's a
not
big
people
difference between being in like a kind of dominant submissive relationship and being in a relationship with a power imbalance.
exactly. And that
Hmm.
is what happens in Rope. And like, people acknowledge that. Like the fact that it's like literally like being blackmailed about murder and everything. But a very similar thing, and I don't know if it's intentional or not, Scream. It comes
Oh,
across that
so
way.
true. Do you know what it is though? It's because, like, I don't know how I didn't think this was gonna happen, but just calling out like the straightest of couples in the world. But like obviously if you grow up straight, good for you. But you like you're kind of told these traditional power dynamics, which is like the male is the dominant and the female is the
Yes.
submissive. But
Yes.
then obviously when you get couples that don't have that binary
Yeah.
line, you get to invent that yourself. And it
It's
obviously
so interesting.
it's so
And
interesting.
what really kills me as well is like people think that that means inside of a queer relationship, say where it's like same sex relationship, a lot of people think there'll be a more feminine and more masculine one because they want that's what's safe to them, that's what they understand. And then they also think on top of that that the feminine one will be the submissive and the masculine one will be the dominant. And it's like, not always.
Hmm.
And I
I
always
think
think
this
it's
is
very interesting when that gets played with.
I was gonna say I'm always upset. Maybe this is why, like, you had like the rise of himbos at one point, because I
Yes.
am so obsessed with people who present as predominantly masculine having quite feminine traits,
Well, I've
and
told you
then
many a
vice
times, I
versa.
love me a himbo. I really do.
Yeah.
There's nothing quite like it,
Hmm.
and that speaks to say like queer taste, and like I don't know, like we literally spoke about this recently when watching Scream, but like, how can you watch that and not see queerness in it? Like,
I
she
know.
comes across like such a himbo.
Hmm.
I love it. I love it.
It's
And
so fucking true.
so good. And I mean, we could talk more about Scream, and while like it does come across as queer, I feel like that's mostly it. Like it's got a
Hmm.
massive gay fan base. There's that tweet. I'm sure you've already shared it on the White Noise Twitter account. It's like, why do you love Scream so much? Like, because I'm gay.
But like honestly, you can put like that's just a template. Like you could put in so, and this is the point of this whole
Yeah.
episode. You can put in so many horror
Yes, but
films.
what is it about Scream? Because that is the one. I don't know if you noticed it, but when the new one came out earlier this year, it was
Hmm.
honestly like the entire LGBT Community just went nuts.
rose up.
I was like,
Yeah.
bloody hell. Like I always knew it was popular in that like community, but like it really like I finally noticed it.
Do you know what a lot of it, I believe it probably is something that like I don't think we've ever really gotten into before, but like obviously these films have a really big impact for queer individuals,
Mm,
but they also bring people together. They find communities like,
very
oh,
true.
it's honestly, it's like everybody's interpretation of are you a friend of Dorothy? It's like, are you a fan of Scream? Are you a fan of Jennifer's Body?
Yeah.
Like if you are, you know
If
what I mean?
someone is a
Like,
little bit too into Scream,
mm,
then I'm like, interesting. Do you know
mhm.
what I mean? And I don't mean like, oh, they know all the characters' names, but like, there's just a certain vibe. You know what I mean?
Honestly,
When
it
they're
is.
like
It's one
Gale
of
Weathers Slay, I'm like, yeah,
it's
yeah.
do you know what I mean though? It's like when you know kind of things. But I think this kind of brings it all together is that like why well no, actually it makes so much sense why it ended up being horror. But I feel like we've now moved past the fact that horror is about the outcast and it's about whatever, because you know, we are getting horror films now that don't have that, and yet the queer community is still obsessed with them.
Mm,
But I think it's because we now have a history of horror being a representation or a safe space for queer
yeah,
people, that's how people they literally find each other. You know, people have probably found their life partners through these films without even necessarily knowing it and
yeah.
things like that. So I
Like on
think
a very
that's why
subconscious level, yeah, it brings everyone
exactly,
together.
this is why I think doing an episode like this for Halloween was so important to us, because you know, yes, we are queer, yes, we love horror, so there was no way you were going to get away with Halloween
Mm-hmm.
without being able to do it. I think every year we've done it in some way.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, to have like an episode fully dedicated to it was important because, you know, I hope some people maybe are able to find each other through
Mm-hmm.
even listening to this, because
I completely
obviously
agree.
things are a lot different now to when we grew up. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
people are a lot more open about things and honest about things. Unfortunately, it's still not a completely safe world.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, you do still need this. You know, we've spoken before about how whether you love gay subtext or you much prefer it to be explicit, subtext is still needed
Mm-hmm.
because there are so many people that are not in positions where they're able to just be completely out, whether to themselves or anybody else. You know, it's the same reason why, you know, everyone's saying like, oh, you know, everybody should have pronouns in their bios and stuff, but it's like not everybody can,
Yeah.
because if they're not in a position where they can put their actual pronouns, they could be exposing themselves in a really unsafe situation. So conversations like this and films like this are really needed so
Yes.
people can feel safe and realize that, you know, hopefully at some point in their lives they'll be able to say to somebody, you know, hey, I really like this film. You know, you don't even have to come out and say I'm
By
this or
saying it
I'm
without
that.
saying it, I agree.
Exactly.
I think this is also where I want to just say like a massive thanks to all the like filmmakers and writers and actors and actresses and all that are involved in making a lot of this media, because it's like so many careers were destroyed through like
Mm.
participating in these things. And it's like they've just given so much to a community, you know, like
Without
uh,
even realizing it.
exactly, say Dorian Gray, you know, to a lot of
Hmm.
people that was so obviously queer. Oscar Wilde kind of got noticed a bit more for, yeah, and like that's back then, and then James Whale in his era, and then Anthony Perkins in Psycho, and then like more recently obviously there's stuff, but like obviously not so intense, but you know what I mean. And it's like it's important to recognize like these aren't just things people did really secretively. It's like even at the time there were people that completely clocked on and they
Hmm.
suffered for it. So I think
Yeah.
it's really important to like recognize their contribution, whether they knew they were doing it or not.
Hmm. I think without us even realizing that's kind of what this episode is,
Yeah, it is.
because
And
you know,
yeah, I'm
there
really
are so many things, at least in my life, that like I, you know, obviously would like to have thought that regardless of what happened, I would have eventually kind of realized this about myself. But subtext or explicitness in the background, whatever, these horror films were a huge part of it, and they still are today.
Mhm.
You know, like I see people who are younger than me, who are able to kind of like find each other through them and things like that. And it's just it's so nice to see. And I can't help but kind of like that it comes from a genre that most people are you know, it's not a conventional genre, you know what I mean? I don't
Mm,
know why, but I just kind of like that it comes from a I mean, it makes sense, but it comes
yeah.
from a non-conventional place. Like people, it's obviously I want to see more movies, you know, just everyday rom-coms and things like that that have queer representation that isn't the sole focus
Hmm.
because, you know, it's they just have queer
It's
representation
just
because
there. Yeah.
it just, you know, it does exist in the world. But I do kind of hope, at least in my lifetime, we don't lose these kind of films because
Yes. I
even to
agree.
this day, I feel I still kind of need them.
Yes, especially those ones that are more like subtexty and, like you say, a bit more like in the background and subtle, because those are the ones that a lot of people can feel safer with. A lot
Mhm.
of people might who have, they're so early on in life, or like their realization that they don't want to just watch a gay horror film. It's just maybe that subtext or that background character maybe will help them a lot and help them realize things. So it's like a lot of the films we've talked about today are kind of more subtle in their queerness. They're not so out there and obvious. And it's like, I think those are the ones I want to continue seeing.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
like I said, that's our generation, which is why again I'd be so interested to hear what other people's are because there are films coming out, you know, this year
Hmm.
that are gonna be that for people, but they're not kind
Hmm.
of films, you know, that even existed.
Yeah.
Well, God knows what would have happened if
Well,
they would have existed when we
even
were younger.
even the latest Scream film, one of the
No,
characters is a queer woman.
exactly.
It's fantastic, and it's just there, and she's allowed
Mhm.
to like be hitting on other women and all, and it's great, and she's an interesting character. She's already a fan favorite. Like that's great to see.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
we're wrapping up this episode. I just want to say that like Sky said, we want to hear your recommendations, but also definitely watch these films if you haven't
Mhm.
already. Don't just go for the ones where it is evidently gay. Go for some
Yeah.
James Whale. Watch some
Mhm.
classic horror and see if you can notice these things. And also, I've mentioned it already. I highly recommend Queer for Fear on Shudder.
Mhm.
Even if you get a 7-day free trial, honestly, the education I've gotten through that documentary series is incredible, and it's just kind of given me way more of an appreciation of these filmmakers, and
Yeah.
especially Anthony Perkins, because his
Mhm.
son is in the documentary and talks about how he didn't know his dad was gay until he passed away, and it's given Psycho a new it's completely changed his view of a lot of stuff. And so
Mhm.
yeah, definitely check that out.
Yeah, as usual on Instagram and you know Twitter and stuff, we'll have our recommendations from this episode. But other than that, I think that's all we've got to say today. This was obviously a bit of a longer episode.
Mhm.
You know, we could talk about this for hours. Really, we could just go on and on and on. But
Well,
we'll
we
stop
kind of do. That's kind
ourselves.
of what the podcast is.
I know it. Oh my god, it literally is. There's no like end. We're always
No.
like, yeah, we'll make this a mini sode, or it was like, well, this will just be whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But yeah,
but
follow us on socials, like Sky said, and leave a like and subscribe, please, if you enjoyed this. It really helps. And we'll see you in the next one.
yeah,
So that's it
no.
from us today, and bye.